Hey guys, I'm Chris with True Fun Entertainment, and today I want to show you guys what I kind of been working on as a side project for something fun to do. First I have to explain that as a kid, I liked three things: computer programming, Mortal Kombat, and believe it or not, the Atari Jaguar. And I've always felt like the Jaguar never really got a fair shake. So, it's kind of the Jaguar and the 3DO were kind of caught between the 2D era and the 3D era, and all the push was to do 3D graphics and stuff. But the Jaguar itself is a 2D powerhouse. Like, it can support parallax scrolling, sprite scaling, 16 million colors, all that stuff. And I've always felt like it could do a faithful port of Mortal Kombat in the arcade. So back then, bringing arcade games home to the consoles, things had to be reduced. The graphics, the sound, things had to be compressed to fit onto these consoles. So making something arcade perfect was always the target of what we were going for. But as we know with Mortal Kombat, the home console versions were not at all arcade perfect. The SNES version had like terrible input lag and all the sprites were smaller. Genesis version played better, but it had a horrible color palette and horrible sound. Actually, the most faithful port was for the PC, which was pretty darn close to the arcade. And that's the one I played the most. But, as I said, I loved the Atari Jaguar as a kid, and I've always felt that the Jaguar could do a faithful port. So now that I'm grown, I like to tinker around with stuff. And I've never dabbled in Jaguar development, but I've known that the homebrew scene for the Atari Jaguar is still quite active. To this day, there's still new Jaguar games coming out from homebrew developers. So I knew I could go out and find like a library or an API to write Jaguar games. And then I said, okay, so how can I, without having to do a full port of Mortal Kombat, what's kind of a slice that I can build on the Jaguar that would kind of prove that Mortal Kombat would have worked and been pretty darn close to the arcade on the Atari Jaguar. So I decided I'm going to rebuild the character select screen. It's going to have user input so that you can select the character you want. It's got animated sprites, so the character that you're on, that fighter, shows up and they're animated. It's going to have music, so there's background music during the select screen. When you select a character, it plays their name, so that's playing the sound effect. So all of these little elements of game development are all kind of brought together in this microcosm that is the character select screen of Mortal Kombat. And to me, it was kind of a vertical slice to prove the Jaguar could have really handled an awesome port of Mortal Kombat. So without further ado, let's take a look. And here we are. We've got the character select screen. You can notice we have the music going in the background. On the control pad, I can hit left and right to go select my character. If I press B button on the pad, it'll say the character's name. So we're doing user input with the control pad. We're doing sound effects when I press the B button. And you can see we have animated sprites on the screen as well. Now, if you're a hardcore fan of the arcade, you're going to notice that Sub-Zero's stance animation is actually a little bit trimmed down. It doesn't have all the frames of animation that we have in the arcade. And this is also true for Raiden as well. He's actually, the lightning effects are a little bit cut down, and his stance is actually shortened just a little bit. And when we get to the graphics portion of this, we'll explain why that is. But everybody else was faithfully ported with all of their frames of animation. So, and you'll notice one more thing. When we changed characters here, the sound effect that's being played is actually the sound effect, I think it's from when Kano does his headbutt and it does a ting. That's not quite accurate to the arcade. In the last segment, we're going to cover audio, and we're going to actually swap out this sound with a sound that's closer to what you'll have in the arcade. And that'll also kind of show you the pipeline of how we go from an audio file in Audacity to the raw format that can actually be imported onto the Jaguar. So, now that we've looked at the game itself, air quotes game, it's not really a game, but it does showcase all the elements of a video game that we would need. And we're using assets directly from the arcade. So, now that we've done that, let's take a look at how the graphics were broken down and what I had to do to get things to work on the Atari Jaguar. So the first thing we had to address is the resolution of the screen. As you can see, the arcade is 400 by 254, where the Jaguar has a resolution of 368 by 240. So we've got less pixels in the width and in the height. So everything had to be kind of condensed down a little bit. You can see the fighter, this is the arcade version on the left. There's a little bit more room for the fighter where I had to push him up a little bit. And actually, I kind of like that because it adds kind of a depth where he kind of overlaps the portraits. I think it actually works pretty well. And you can see there's less room on the left and right of the portraits where that had to be condensed. And then here in the middle, I was able to preserve the actual 100% of the pixels for the Mortal Kombat logo, but you can see around the left and right borders, I cut it down just a little bit on the Jaguar version. Everything else was ported faithfully, pixel by pixel. And the fighters themselves are 100% of the pixels that you have on the arcade version. Now, as I said, with Sub-Zero, we had to cut down some of the frames of animation. So on the left, we have the arcade animation, and on the right is the Jaguar. You can see it's just a little bit more shallow. It doesn't have as much of the bounce in there. And this is because I couldn't get all of the frames of animation to go on the Jaguar. The arcade version is actually 12 frames of animation, where with the Jaguar, I was able to squeeze in 8 frames of animation. So all of the frames of animation are in one Targa file. And the max resolution I could get up to was 1080. So I actually kind of took a subset of the frames within that 12. I took kind of the middle section and had that loop. And it's pretty close. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And as I said, I've never done Jaguar development before. This is all new to me. So I'm sure a seasoned developer for the Jaguar could make this happen and could find clever ways to fit this in. But with my little project here, this is as close as I can get. And as I mentioned, the frames for Raiden are truncated as well. And it's similar to this, where I cut it down to 8 for the Jaguar. Then the lightning itself, the tricky part with the lightning was I had to time it so that the lightning, we can go back to this other image here to kind of show Raiden. So the timing of the lightning, I'm not sure how they do it with the arcade version. It may actually be in the code where they turn off and on the lightning. But I tried to do the animation with the frames of animation themselves. So there'd be so many blank frames in the animation. And then with those blank frames, you could time it out to where, okay, the first piece of lightning is going to go around his leg, and it's going to take 6 frames, but then it'll be blank for the next 12 frames. And with those 12 frames, I could then animate like the right leg, that it would have 6 frames of animation. And then maybe the hat does its lightning. So I tried to time all that out, but again, I ran into image constraints where I couldn't go too big. And when it came to the chest animation for the lightning, it was just, it fit, but it didn't have enough room to have the blank frames that could loop, such that it would look like it was timed properly. So I went ahead and took it out, and I think it works. It's close enough with the lightning on the hat and then the legs. And like I said, if you're a seasoned Jaguar developer, I am absolutely positive there's ways to squeeze this in and make it work. But for this little demo, I wanted to focus on touching each of the elements. Like I said, like sound, music, animation, user input. I wanted to handle all of that just to kind of prove I could build out the game if I wanted to. Where the finer details are, to me, that would be polish at the end. This was more of a proof of concept that we could do it. Now, as I mentioned, the images on the Atari Jaguar are stored as Targa files. And this was actually, it took me a while to figure out my pipeline of how I was going to produce images for the game. Usually I just use paint.net. It's a free tool for Windows to create images. But I couldn't get it to export Targa files in a format that was recognized by the Jaguar. Everything was scrambled, the pixels were off, the color palette was all off. So I kind of did some research and actually had to go back and find Paint Shop Pro, which if you've never heard of Paint Shop Pro, it was a desktop paint tool that was big like in the late 90s. And the version I'm using is Paint Shop Pro 6, which is from 1999. But using that, I'm able to save the images in the right format. And kind of the workflow I came up with, I use this website, easygif.com, and I would upload my PNG file. So, well, first I would create the PNG file in paint.net that had all of my frames of animation. So let's look at an example. All right, so I've got Sub-Zero loaded in here. This is my subzero.png file. And this is the 8 frames of animation that are loaded in. And with the API I'm using, which is the Raptor API, it handles animations in a stack. So you essentially you have your one sprite, but then you can stack, as long as they're the same dimensions, you can stack each frame and it will iterate through those frames to create the animation. So I've got everything loaded up in this one image. Then I'm going to convert it to GIF. Now the reason I have to do this is for the transparency. With the PNG file transparency, saving it as a Targa file, it didn't respect the transparency once it got loaded up in the Jaguar. So if I found that if I go from PNG to GIF, then from GIF to Paint Shop Pro, then save it as a Targa, it worked. So now that I have the GIF version, I'm going to File, copy this. Now I'm going to go into Paint Shop Pro. Okay, and in Paint Shop Pro, I'm going to just Control V to paste my image. We're going to save it. So we're going to select our file type as TGA, a Targa file. And then in the options menu, this was the part that took a while to figure out. So we've got to set the bit depth to 16-bit, and then compression, we want uncompressed. Then we're going to click OK and save the file. And now I wanted to hop over and take a look at the code. So with this project, there are 3 main files. There's a wrap app.s, a wrap init.s, and a wrap u235.s. Right now we're looking at the init file, and this basically establishes what our sprite objects are going to be within the game. So right now we're looking at the Sub-Zero object. So this is the animated Sub-Zero that we're seeing. Once we've got Sub-Zero selected, this is the animation or the object that is going to play. And we can see this is assembly. So this is, if you're used to high-level languages like C#, C++, Java, things like that, this is all written in assembly. So this is a low-level language. It was crazy to me. As a kid, I was trying to learn how to program my own video games, doing it on C and C++, things like that. But Ed Boon had actually tweeted out a section of code, and he asked if anybody could figure out what it was. Well, it turns out it was the code for Sonya's Square Wave in Mortal Kombat. And it was a surprise to me at the time because the code looked like this, because it was done in assembly, not C++ or some other high-level language. This is kind of coded to the metal. This is how you get the most performance out of your game. So here we can see we're setting up the Sub-Zero object. By default, it's inactive. So I have all the fighters turned off by default. And then as you move the cursor through the different fires, I then turn on whatever sprite needs to be turned on. So by default, we're going to be off. This is setting the X value as 10 and the Y value to 160. That puts them in that lower left corner. Okay. Our sprite width is 68 and the sprite height is 135. Now we're going to scroll down a little bit, and these are our 2 animation settings. We can see the sprite animation speed we're setting as a 7, and this just sets the delay that we're going to get between frames. And I tinkered with it a little bit, and 7 seemed to be pretty close to the animation speed of the arcade. And then this is our number of frames. So, and it is 0 based. So in this case, it being set as 7 means that there are a total of 8 frames of animation. We do want the animation to repeat. We're not using any kind of sprite scaling. And that's it. While we're here, we'll also show that in this init file is pretty much just where we set up all of the sprites in the game. So you can see all of these. We've got our Raiden object, we've got our Kano. As we go up, we have the like Sonya selector object and the Sub-Zero selector. These are the cursors that show up over the portrait where it flashes the green with a like player one. That's these selectors that I turn off and on as the cursor goes through. And the last thing I want to show you here, let's go back down to the Sub-Zero object. That's Scorpion, Sub-Zero. So we can see Sub-Zero's GFX base comes from this BMP underscore Sub-Zero. This is defined in our wrap.app file. So I'm going to copy this, go into wrap.app.s and do a control find. So this first part, this is the conversion from that raw Targa file into an image format that the Jaguar can understand. So that's what these 3 lines of code are doing. But let's go down one more. And this is where we're actually specifying the file that will be loaded into that BMP underscore Sub-Zero object. And we can see we're going to data file, GFX, Sub-Zero.targa. And that's the same Targa file we just created in PaintShop Pro. So now that we've taken a look at the graphics and a little bit of the code, I want to hop over to look at the sound and kind of how that pipeline works of going from something in Windows like a WAV file and getting it into a RAW format that is understandable by the Jaguar. And we're going to do this by, we're going to swap out that sound. So as I said, when you cursor through the characters on the character select screen, I believe it's Kano's headbutt sound. So when he clangs his head, it does this clang sound. And it's close to the sound that the arcade makes, but it's not quite right. And I think I found a sound that's better. So in real time here, we're going to swap those out, and then we're going to rerun the game and see how it sounds. So again, let's run the game to get a reminder of what that sounds like. Then we'll jump into Audacity to hear the sounds, and then we'll export and put them in the game. So now that we select our character, you hear that sound, and it's the metal headbutt sound that you hear with Kano. So let's swap that out. So now I'm over here in Audacity, and this is the isolated sound effect that we use currently when selecting a different fighter. Okay, and here is the sound that I found that I think is a little bit closer to what the arcade uses. So let's take this, and it's going to be in WAV format. So I'm going to go export as WAV. So now we have the WAV file of our sound, but we have to get it in a format that the Jaguar can understand, which is a .raw file. To do this, I went through a couple iterations, and it took a little tinkering to figure out. Audacity itself can export as a raw file, but it never worked. It was always either too fast or too slow or cut off. I just couldn't get it to work. So after doing some Googling, I did finally found there's a tool called SOX, S-O-X, and it will take in a WAV file and export it as the perfect raw file that works right in the Jaguar. So let's run that command line and run it. Oh, I've got too much in here. 1 second. Let's clean this up. So let's go back. There we go. SOX. Okay, so now it has exported the new file as select2.raw. So now we're back in the code. I'm in wrap.app.s, and here's where we were, where our Sub-Zero Targa was pulled in. Below that is where we load in the audio files. So we can see we have this select raw file, and that's for the sound effect as we move the cursor. So now we have this new select2 raw. So I'm going to save that. And as a reference, so this select sample and then select in, Johnny Cage sample, Johnny Cage end, all of these are showing where the file can be accessed. And these are defined in this wrap U235 file. This is where we define our sample bank. So we can see sample 0 is the select sound, and this is where it ends. sample 1 is the Johnny Cage sound and where it ends, and then so on for the rest of the sound files in the game. Okay, so now we've got this select sample now points to our new select 2. So let's run it and see how it sounds. Okay, moment of truth, let's hear it. Yes, definitely close to the arcade. So that's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and hopefully you guys can use this if you're into Jaguar development. You will need to go download the Raptor API, and then you can go into GitHub and download the source code for this example. And it's actually structured in such a way that it will fall into the examples folder that already come packaged with the Raptor API. So I encourage you, download this, get it running on your local, and then who knows, maybe somebody wants to actually take this and finish out the Mortal Kombat port, the full port on the Atari Jaguar. That'd be amazing. So let me know what you think, or if you do happen to use this example for something that you're building, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to see it. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.